Do you wonder if the Bible is true? If Jesus and God are real? We are often told and expected to believe all of this and accept it by faith. But God meets us where we are, and He has been revealing His truth of the Bible and Himself through biblical geography. Be prepared for fascinating stories that will challenge and inspire your faith in just a moment, so don't go anywhere. This program is made possible by financial support from Smile Online Course and Books. Smile Online offers online courses for teens and young adults designed to help them master social and career skills. Subject matter includes customer service skills, job interviewing, electronic etiquette, and managing stress. For more information, visit thefatherhoodchallenge.com. That's thefatherhoodchallenge.com.
Welcome to the Fatherhood Challenge, a movement to awaken and inspire fathers everywhere to take great pride in their role and to challenge society to understand how important fathers are to the stability and culture of their family's environment. Now, here's your host, Jonathan Guerrero.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. Dr. Beck is a biblical geographer, professor, author, and the host of the fourth and final season of the 10-episode docu-series, The Holy Land, connecting the land with its stories. It's produced by Our Daily Bread Ministries. Dr. Beck, thank you so much for being on the Fatherhood Challenge.
Jonathan, thanks for the invitation. Always a joy to be with people who love the Lord and love His Word.
Dr. Beck, what is the story behind what inspired you to go into biblical geography?
Yeah, it's sort of a strange world, isn't it, Jonathan? You know, there's a lot of things you could say that you do that people would pretty quickly understand. I'm an airline pilot, I'm a pastor, but when I say I'm a Bible geographer, that usually gives people pause because it's just not a concept they necessarily have met before. And I didn't either, right? So there was a long time when I recognized there was geography in the Bible, but never really integrated it into my reading and interpretation of text, which is a little surprising given the fact that for my entire life, I've been an outdoor person. I always have loved being outdoors. In fact, I say that a bad day outdoors is much better than a good day indoors. In spite of that, my Bible reading and my passion for the natural world sort of lived in separate corners for a very long time. They came together when I was in graduate school, and I was blessed to have Dr. Barry Beitzel as the mentor who opened this door for me. I took a class of his called the Geography of the Bible, and in the first hour of that class, we looked at Matthew 4:13. Jesus left Nazareth and went to Capernaum. And of course, I had read that dozens of times before. I was an avid Bible reader before this, but I never thought to unpack it in the way and with the depth that we did. And I can tell you, Jonathan, from that moment on, the next 30 years of my life changed. And the Lord took this trajectory I had, which was really a student of Bible languages, and turned it into someone who combined his love for Bible languages with love for the land. And I've never looked back. I've never looked back. And I just love to find all the different ways that place participates in the telling of the Bible story.
I still remember as a kid listening to the sermons and listening to pastors mention specific locations and things, and opening up my Bible and looking at the map and trying to make sense of where all of this stuff is happening. And then you hear things like, okay, Paul traveled from here and he went from this location to this location. And I'm one of these that was trying to geek out. Okay, well, exactly how far is that? They didn't have cars back then. So what kind of a walk was this? Simple things like Mary and Joseph, when they traveled for the census, what was that walk like? Did they travel during the daytime? Did they travel during the night? What was the topography? Was it a rough walk? Was it a lot of hills? How dangerous was it? Because I'm really wanting to visualize the entire journey, not just the journey of their life or their experience, but the physical journey of where they were going, the towns that they stopped at along the way.
Yeah.
Why did they go a certain route? There had to be some reason for that.
Jonathan, you sound like a Bible geographer. Those are exactly the sort of questions that I ask. And I think I had some of the same frustration that you just gave voice to. And that is, we encounter a place name in the text or a road, and we go to our maps in the back. And while they're helpful a bit for orientation, one place name looks very much like another place name on the map. And even if we have a good topographic map and are competent in reading topographic relief maps, we may not take everything from the mention of place that the biblical author or poet intended to put in. And I think that's what's so fascinating to me, is that the concept of geography is intimately bound to the communication process. Remember, I said I was a linguist before, and well, still am. But the idea that somehow language exists apart from place is a fallacy. And so, how I think, how I most naturally speak and communicate, is very much a product of where I'm from and who the biblical authors and poets were and how they thought and how they most naturally communicated is very much a product of where they're from. And so I see place geography permeating up through their language in all sorts of places, and all I needed to do was know how to think about it, where to look for it, and suddenly the light switch goes on and that story comes alive in a way it never had before. What I find so fascinating about the geography of Israel is its incredible diversity. And, having had the opportunity to lead hundreds of people on field study programs in Israel with Jerusalem University College, I can tell you that almost no one comes into the country expecting the kind of geographic diversity they encounter or experience. By my count, there are at least 14, maybe 15 distinct ecological areas within this land. It's only about 145 miles north to south, 45 east to west. In this small little footprint, you keep changing the picture. And so, if you're going to integrate the land of Israel with the Bible's communication, there isn't just one geographic picture that you need to have. You need to have an entire photo album that allows you to pivot very quickly between regional geographies. Some of those are mountainous. Some of those are big basin valleys. Some are dry desert wilderness areas. Some are river valleys. Each of those produces a different kind of story. And I think because we tend to live in the same place and see our story evolving only against that one geographic picture, we may not have the sense that if we took our story and moved it somewhere else to a different geographic reality, it would change that story. And I would argue the same is true in the Bible. There's a Judean hill country story. There's a Judean foothills or Shephelah story. There's a Judean wilderness kind of story. There's a Samaria kind of story. There's a Mount Hermon kind of story. And so once I figure out where I am, I need to begin to unpack the true nature of that space, its physical geography, its human geography, its natural history. And when I do that, I can figure out what kind of story might best fit in one of those subregions. And that's a great starting point for reading a piece of poetry or reading a story by, first of all, putting it in its correct geographic region. We go into a region and we unpack its physical realities and distinguish it from other places that might be in the land around it. We talk about how the human experience in that particular subregion evolves differently than the human experience in other regions. And then we look at the kind of story that geography precipitates. And it gives us a chance then to unpack Bible stories over against the physical realities. And we go to another place and do the same thing all over again. And that's what the film does. It moves from region to region to region, unpacks the geography, and tells its stories. And it's not everything one needs to read the Bible well geographically, but my goodness, if you want a gateway, a starting point, this documentary series really can do the job.
How have your travels, experiences, and studies helped you connect Jesus between the Old Testament scriptures and the New Testament scriptures?
I got to tell you, Jonathan, Israel is a very small land. It's about the size of New Jersey, actually a little smaller than the size of New Jersey. And it means that not every story gets its own space. Stories sort of build on top of one another, like I say, layers of limestone in the country build on one another. So these stories build on one another. And it means that Jesus may go to a place, say or do something in that place, which is built on what happened there before. And I love stories like that become fuller in the sense that I understand why Jesus may have gone to a place. Would you like an example? I can
I
give
would
you an
love
example.
an example.
Let's go to Luke 7. Jesus leaves the place we see him most often by the Sea of Galilee, Capernaum, his home base of operation, and he travels a full day south to the northern slope of Mount Moreh, and there we find a little village of Nain. Now, this is a full day's walk. And you got to ask the question, okay, what is the purpose in going to that place? Well, when they arrive at the city gate, there's a funeral procession coming out. A widow is taking her only son to the cemetery who has recently died. Jesus gets in the path, tells the lady, you can stop weeping now, and turns to the young man and says, young man, I say to you, get up, which sounds crazy, but he does. And he returns him to his mother. Now, Jonathan, that's a great story. Wherever you would put that, that's an amazing story. But it's a Nain story on Mount Moreh. And so Luke doesn't stop telling the story there, which would be a good place to do the mic drop in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
Instead, he allows the people of the village of Nain to talk, and they say, a great prophet has risen among us. God has come to help, in Aramaic, Elishia, to help his people. And suddenly, my mind goes swirling back through time to that same mountain, and I read that in Kings that Elisha the prophet on that same mountain, about 2.5 miles to the south of where Jesus was in Nain, Elisha at the village of Shunem, raises a young man from the dead and gives him back to his mother. Now, that's a story that sticks to a place, right? It is the big Shunem story. It is the big Mount Moreh story. So when Jesus comes to this mountain and does exactly the same miracle in the same geographic area, the people put the two together and go, oh, this is just like Elisha did. And they make the connection that Jesus is a prophet, and even a greater prophet than the one who had conducted a story on that mountain earlier. That's a great example of how Jesus intentionally goes to places, says things, does things with the intention of making sure I connect what he's saying and doing to something that had happened there in the past, in the Old Testament.
My mind is blown by that. This comes back to something that I've always seen, a pattern, and that is that Jesus always meets people where they are. And yes, I could see the layers plainly, the layers that Jesus built on. This is the connection between the Old and the New Testament. That would greatly build my faith in the scriptures.
and it was baked into the culture. Deuteronomy 6 and 11 are talking to parents, talking to moms and dads. And those texts say, talk about these things when you sit at home. Now watch this. When you walk along the road. Now, what is there to see along the road that becomes an instructional classroom setting that parents can use for their children? Well, it's this land full of stories that correlate one to one another. And until someone points it out And if you're only meeting it in a text where pages can sometimes separate stories by thousands of pages, if you're looking at that on the land, you can't help but see the interaction between those stories. And I think that's part of that intentionality that parents are told to teach when you're walking along the road, so that your students can build these bridges between stories. And it's because people read and understood the stories of the Bible in that way that Jesus could teach in that way. We have to join them because we don't necessarily think of that connectivity in the same way.
My mind is going back to something you said earlier, which is the fact that the size of Israel is less than the size of New Jersey. And I've driven through and across north, south, east, west through New Jersey. It's not a big state at all. If you have a landmass that small and a history of thousands of years, and you're having to pack a lot of stories in that land, if you've lived there, there's so much history, it's hard to even go a mile without finding something meaningful about a location.
Now you've seen two ways that you can use geography to unpack a Bible story. It could be the physical realities that are helping to animate and inform that story. It could be what happened there before that's helping to animate that story. So by simply paying attention to where I am, rather than sort of allowing place to be off my interpretive grid, I have all sorts of tools available to read and interpret a text in a way I haven't before. And that's exactly what the Holy Land series is designed to do, is to kickstart that in people's lives, to help them see that these stories have homes, and those homes inform how those stories evolve.
The other thing I always wondered when I go through and when I did my study of Solomon's kingdom when he was building the temple, and there were supply lines coming from all sorts of different locations. Certain types of wood came from here, certain types of metals and gold came from different lands. And the Bible is very specific about those locations. And I read that and I know that things in the Bible aren't just mentioned just because. There's always a purpose. So, what is it about that part of the scripture that is important for us to know when it comes to where all these materials are coming from?
Couple things that will build on one another. First of all, when God chose Israel as the promised land, I think there's some great intentionality there. And it has to do with the geography. The ancient land of Canaan, Israel, is a land bridge that is going to facilitate movement between three continents. Now, why is it a land bridge? Well, because you have a Mediterranean Sea pressing from the west, you have the Arabian Desert pressing from the east, creating a travel corridor that at times is only 20-25 miles in width. So you're going to end up moving commodities through there. So it's a natural for trade goods to move through this space. And Solomon is taking advantage of that. He's simply tapping into that international trade network. But flip it around and go, okay, well, the Lord wasn't so much interested in the economics as he was in gospel movement. Why not set the story that will change everyone's lives forever in a place where it will be guaranteed to be heard, because the merchants who are moving through this narrow travel corridor, moving right past those places that are full of stories, will pick up those stories and deliver them along with their salt and bitumen and aromatics and wool. Those will be dispersed throughout the world well in advance of Pentecost. So we have an international mission going on in the Old Testament era already, and the signal that that's actually occurring is in that commodities trade we see going on with Solomon.
So, even then, it was all about the spread of the gospel. It was routing for those memories, for those stories, so that they could not be forgotten.
Yeah, Genesis 12:3 does two things. It promises Abraham and Sarah a land and tells them that that land is Canaan, and tells them that all nations will be blessed through you. In 7 verses, we've got the whole story of land connection and dissemination all in those first 7 verses of Genesis 12.
What was your most memorable experience in your travels that challenged or strengthened your personal faith and made you feel closer to God?
I've taught in the land for 30 years. So seen place after place after place, visited it over and over again. But there's one place that always sort of rocks my world a little bit more than others, and that's the Mount of Olives. And people are often surprised by that. They go, "Oh, what? When the world would that be? This 2-mile extended ridge that's east of the city of ancient Jerusalem." And it's because of what I see happening there on Maundy Thursday in the Garden of Gethsemane. The linguist in me feels compelled to say that when the gospel writers tell that story of Jesus, they use language the likes of which we find nowhere else to describe anyone else, much less Jesus. The duress and hardship that he's under, the great struggle that he's under. And it leads me to ask the question, okay, what is there about the place that might be participating in that struggle? And here's the geography that always sort of rocks my world. If you are on the Mount of Olives in the Garden of Gethsemane, you are at a hinge point between the city of Jerusalem and the Judean wilderness. You're right on the seam between the two. The Judean wilderness is so under-resourced, unfarmable. No one's out there except those who are trying to get away from everyone else. And we actually see that occurring in the Old Testament. David, son Solomon, was approaching Jerusalem in order to usurp control of the kingdom from his father. David decides, I'm going to get away. He goes down into the Kidron Valley, right past where the Garden of Gethsemane would have been, over the ridge and out into the wilderness. I'm suggesting that it's as if David put up a big arrow for Jesus to consider. If you need to get away from the trouble in Jerusalem, what do? Over the ridge, 40 minutes walk, and you're away from it all. If you're going to do what's best for you, Jesus, you go out into that wilderness. No one's going to find you out there. But if you do what's best for me, you're going to go and walk west back into the city towards the arrest, towards the cross. And at that moment, in that very authentic moment of struggle that we see Jesus having on the Mount of Olives, that is the geographical point that he is at. Do I escape and do what's best for me? Do I go back and die on the cross for others? And what he did is he looked at me and said, I'm going back to the city for you. And at that moment, that place always rocks me because I realize at that very moment, my forgiveness came at a tremendous cost, but it's a cost Jesus was willing to pay.
Wow, that's powerful.
Certainly that part of the ridge was very much industrial olive grove. And that's where we find Jesus hanging out on that evening.
How has God personally revealed himself to you and become real for you?
I have to say that the grand bulk of my experiences with the divine are a product of my interaction with the word in place. But I can't help but feel this incredible blessing that I've experienced throughout my life that allows me to go, wow, I really get to do this. This is my life. And in that, I feel that incredible power of the Almighty in my life, that he would allow me, even though I am as insignificant as I am, allow me to become a part of this larger kingdom enterprise. And what a blessing that is.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like in your work, you're feeling very, very connected through your purpose. That this is what you were created to do. And through your work, through your own personal experiences, both physical experiences and experiences through your studies, you were building other people's faith. And that is your mission. That's what gets you out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, it is. I've always loved helping people read their Bibles. That whatever I was doing, right, in my life, whether I was pastoring a church or whether I was teaching in a university, traditional university classroom, or writing a book or doing film production, somehow at the base of all of that, it's like, all right, the Lord has given you some gifts to help people read their Bibles in even better fashion. And when they do that, they get to know me better. So there's win-win for everybody here. it's really a joy to have a chance to be able to share in such a wide array of ways, from teaching field study programs to film production to writing.
Okay, so I've got a personal question here with this. So my sons are both very, very actively engaged in their own Bible studies
Sure.
and trying to build their own faith through their study. I routinely see them in their Bibles studying regularly. And one of the things and the challenges I've tried to do is to find ways to encourage them to go deeper into their own personal study. So, for both my own curiosity and for dads that might be listening, what are some really good questions to teach kids to ask as they study?
For Bible readers, the first question I'd always ask is, what does this passage tell me about who God is? That's number one. Number two is, what does it tell me about how he thinks about me? Because that's a little different than who God is. That's a how do you engage with me? And then third, how is he challenging me to think about and act towards others? And I think by the time I've asked those three questions, I have a pretty solid block of information that I'm going to discover in any text. And then, of course, as a Bible geographer, I can't help but add, then figure out where you are and figure out how geography may have percolated up through the language of that text, and how does it improve, shape, enhance the things that you have begun to discover in that text.
I find that really, really, really helpful. So, Dr. Beck, how can listeners learn more about you, what you're doing, or connect with you?
Yeah, so I do have a website. It's undergoing some revision right now, but still up and running. It's John, John, middle initial A, Beck, Beck, John A. Beck author.com. All without punctuation until you get to the dot before the com, johnabeckauthor.com. That is going to have the wide array of things that I've done. I have an Amazon page with all the books that I've written on it. There's the Our Daily Bread YouTube channel, which accesses all the media work that I have done with them. And there's the Our Daily Bread app, which is brand new, but the Our Daily Bread app actually takes the seasons, the 4 seasons of the Holy Land, and provides Bible study support materials for it. So if someone would like to not only watch and engage, but actually have some things that they can interact with and do, that app is helpful as well.
Just to make things easier, if you go to thefatherhoodchallenge.com, that's thefatherhoodchallenge.com. If you go to this episode's entitled Biblical Geography. Go to that episode, look right below the episode description. I will have all of the links that Dr. Beck just mentioned posted right there for your convenience. Dr. Beck, it has absolutely been an honor having you on the Fatherhood Challenge. You've changed the way that I read the Bible, that I look for scripture. You've made me more enthusiastic to go deeper.
You're welcome, Jonathan. Mission accomplished.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fatherhood Challenge. If you would like to contact us, listen to other episodes, find any resource mentioned in this program, or find out more information about the Fatherhood Challenge, please visit thefatherhoodchallenge.com. That's thefatherhoodchallenge.com.